All right, welcome back to the Hub Podcast. We've been watching the live streams alongside with you over in New Orleans, New York, and Washington, D.C. I am here with the Mexican metalhead and Arielle. It's been peaceful for, a lot of these parts. We lost a couple live streams. I'm always worried whenever I see a live stream go down as to what's going on in that place at that time.
Like, is it Washington, D.C. situation all over again, Lafayette Square, where they're taking all, this, the live stream ability out?
And it makes you wonder, are these protests remaining peaceful because of mounting pressure? Because here's the thing, I am positive that if there wasn't such widespread access to cell phone cameras and live streaming, police would still be getting away with brutality.
100%.
Oh yeah, yesterday we actually spent a good amount of time talking about how social media is impacting this civil rights movement that's going on right now. Just because you have people live streaming it, which means before, whenever there was a protest, you would capture it on film, you would capture it in video. They would arrest you and then they would destroy all evidence, or it gets misplaced, it disappears somehow.
Which is still happening.
That footage will never get out to the general public. But now, thanks to live streaming, we have this incredible ability for it to already be immediately onto the cloud.
Yeah, cut out the middleman of the potential for it to be lost, and it's immediately with the people right away. Mm-hmm. That's a huge part. Because even these body cam footages, you can't always trust, because they end up in the midst of it, it got covered. Yeah.
Or disconnected, or turned off somehow, malfunctioned.
Exactly. Any whatever bullshit excuse.
So you work in media. We've seen, how the government, the police officers, how they treat media. How do you feel about about that?
This is where it actually kind of does take a turn, because for the most part, the media was on the side of the protectors, on the side of the police, because we're trying to show, at least from the TV news station perspective, that we live in a society that functions properly. And we're so used to living in a society in which police are such an integral part of it that we want to show that, blue lives matter. Mm-hmm. So that's how the goal of the news media is to be as unbiased and just report. Just to not have opinions, to observe as possible. So that we need to set that as the attention. That is what the intention of the news media is. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, local, especially independent news stations, which are very necessary, very, very necessary to the media community, because you need to have these differentiating perspectives. The problem with news stations is that they have to broadcast their news because the money that brings in is ads. People do not pay to be on a news station because you're supposed to be a member of the community. You don't pay people you interview. You don't pay guests. So news gets most of their revenue from ads. And those ads are targeted to the demographic that this news station is. To
specific demographics.
Yes.
Which is why we see a difference in between the networks. Like Fox has a very specific demographic in comparison to CNN, MSNBC.
Yes. Because bottom line is they get their revenue and their attention. Everything that they push out is to the demographic that they're trying to appeal to. So the more they appeal to the demographic of the news that they're pushing, the better the ads will be, the more people will tune in, so on and so forth. So as a member of the news media, I recently lost my job at a news station, which is fine. That was because of COVID. That had nothing to do with anything due to the station itself. But looking back on it, we were incredly biased. When I first got a job there, I kind of knew that it had to be a step-up job because I was told going in that they were a right-leaning station. And this goes back to the opinions of the media. Media does not have an opinion. Media should not have an opinion. Media should report facts and nothing else. So this is where it gets a bit dicey, because from what I can tell in the protests, reporters are doing that. Mm-hmm. They're not engaging. They're not protesting. They're not wearing any outfits. They're not wearing masks like this that say Black Lives Matter, because they're there to observe. They forfeited their opinions when they chose to become public figures in the news media, because they're not there to give their opinions. They're there to report what's going on.
Yeah, that is basic journalism 101 at that point.
Yeah. So
to tell the truth.
Yeah, So if you run into someone who calls himself a reporter and they say things on air, on a reputable news station, saying, I think this, or we think this, or this should be this, that's very, very plain not newsworthy news. Or that's not what it should be, because you're supposed to be reporting facts. So that's what makes it interesting about these protests, is because they're obviously not engaging. They are obviously not protesting. They are there to show what's going on, and if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be embarrassed with the media.
So going along with what you just said right there, you have nothing to hide. That is a rhetoric often used toward, surveillance against the average citizen.
And police coercion, of course.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, that they always say. However, investigations, when it comes down to the police department, they seem to abide by a different set of rules.
Yes.
If they have nothing to hide, why is it that they are allowed to review all the footage before they were able to make an official statement? How is it that they're able to conversate with their other police officers? Like, this is where I feel like even the good officers
and how is
feel
it
pressure.
That millions and millions of dollars, to the point where the total amount of money being spent is in the billions, is spent on police settlements and wrongful suits. What's going on with the police that you need to spend $1 billion on suits? In NYC alone, all of the money that is spent on childcare, housing, homeless shelters, on education, if you take all of that and you add it together, it is still less than the amount of money that is spent on policing policing the state, policing the city. So you have, I think the number, I will need to double check it, so don't quote me on this. The number was about $1.1 billion for the police.
Damn.
And it was under $1 billion for the rest of the city, like city benefits.
Sounds about right.
Yesterday we were talking about that too. Why is it when officers, when there's lawsuits put against the police department, that it comes out of taxpayer money, not from the departments?
Yeah, it's like they almost have like nothing to lose at that point, because they're not having the money directly taken from them. It's almost like recycled to not be allocated to where it could have been gone to for the community.
And this is probably where I think we can get into, we have a caller that we're about to call right now. He's a good friend of mine, also a really good contact. His name is Lamar Butler. He's an HBCU grad. He graduated with a degree in forensics. He is currently a teacher in South Carolina, and he's got big plans. He's also an activist and a motivational speaker, so he has a lot to say.
Yeah, no, I'm really
on what's going on.
I'm really excited to hear that.
Hey, Lamar.
Hey. All right, Will, Josh, Kai. Hey, how's everybody doing?
Hey.
To just jump right into it, I recently participated in a peaceful protest here in Florence, South Carolina, and for me, that was one way to kind of continue the process that I'd already started. Like, for me, being a black man in this space, what's going on is not something new. It's not something that's just popped up. It's something that I've been fighting for and been doing for a while now. This isn't the first time I've ever stepped out into a protest. This is the first time I've spoken out. So for me, handling myself in this space is remembering that the fight is always going to be a fight. Until racism is truly gone, until oppression is truly gone, like, it's always going to be a fight. So what can I do from whatever space I may be in, whether it be as a teacher, whether it be as a mentor, whether it be as a friend, whether it be as a black man and an activist, I have to do something. So always taking action and having difficult conversations, being willing to put myself out there. That's kind of what I'm doing, and then finding a way to take care of myself mentally and emotionally and spiritually in a very healthy fashion, to ensure that I don't get weary, that I don't get bogged down in negative emotions, but I'm always trying to build something constructive.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah, have you felt more empowered now that there's a lot more people out here protesting alongside you?
Absolutely. I definitely feel more empowered because there's power in numbers and there's power in unity. Everything about being black initially was about a community. Like, blacks moved in a community. We moved as a one force. So now to get back to that, it feels good. It feels good that people are trying to get back and understand that we won't move forward unless we all come together. So that's really empowering. And it's like, it's a breath of fresh air to, like, for once we're not fighting each other. We're not cussing each other out on social media. We're not talking down on each other. We're looking at each other as family. Like, hey, we need to support each other. Like, hey, my brother, my sister, like, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Hey, I'm just checking in. Like, you have random people who I haven't spoken to in a while that are calling to check in, that are texting to check in, and just to make sure, like, how are you doing mentally? Like, how are you doing during this time? So it's a very beautiful thing.
And would you say you're doing a lot stronger because of it?
Yes,
Okay.
I feel stronger in some ways, but I also like when you have to understand again what's going on. It also still is another attack. It's that never like, why now? Like, why do we got to keep going through this? This is 2020. This shouldn't even be a thing, right? So you feel that as well. So you feel empowered because of unity, but then you're reminded that we're unifying because something that should have been done away with hundreds of years ago is still existing and still alive and well.
I personally have seen a lot of, criticism online when it comes down to the Black Lives Matter movement. Would you be okay answering a couple questions, or at least your view as to when people say these kind of comments?
Yeah, I'll definitely give my perspective. I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody except myself, but I'll definitely answer some questions.
The reason why we're calling you is because you are an expert witness, because you've been involved for as long as I've known you. Obviously, when we're asking you these questions, we're not asking you to speak on behalf of all Black people that exist. This is definitely your own expert testimony.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for us. We're only speaking from our own personal experiences, and we're here to have a conversation and hopefully be educated, because there may be things that we may not know. Yeah, we just want to have that open dialogue. One criticism that I've seen online is, why did we wait for 2020 for Black Lives Matter to hit the media again? Why is it that it's always before an election?
I want it to be understood that the media is controlled by whiteness. And when I say whiteness, not necessarily white people, but the idea of white supremacy. That's what the media is controlled by. So Black Lives Matter is a movement that never ended. It always kept going. People have always still been fighting, but they're not going to publicize it. Why? Because they wanted to make it seem like it's this thing that pops up every now and then. It only pops up when something bad happens. Nah, it's always been there. So you're not going to see it because we don't get to control the media outlets. If blacks had more power and could put what we wanted out there more easily, because we do in some ways, but if we had the level of access and the level of ability to just put out what we wanted to put out for our people and for the world to understand, it would look a lot different. The media wouldn't be the same. But when we don't get to control the media outlets, they can shut Black Lives Matter down as a thing on their networks all day long until it comes to election cycle, because what happens now, you need something to invigorate the black vote. You need a candidate needs to have something to talk about of why they are going to galvanize the black people. Like, we understand that Hillary Clinton pretty much lost because she couldn't galvanize the black vote. We didn't get out to vote for her. So, like, now another election cycle is coming. It gives those who are running in office something to talk about. It gives them a chance to say, okay, I care about black people. Whether or not they really do, that's a whole different story. But it at least gives them something to talk about, and now it's in the media again because of the election cycle. That's it. We don't control it. It's not our fault.
That is something that I noticed as well, that the attention doesn't go on there until they need them to mobilize. We have a couple of questions on the chat here as well.
We do have a chat that does say, I'm going to read it out loud to you, and I just want you to respond to it if you can. But it says, BLM doesn't care about blacks killed by other blacks in Chicago, but when whites do it, everyone gets outraged. I do have my own opinion about that, but this kind of goes back into, I think we did have a conversation about it some years back, on this term black on black crime. Just because we never hear white on white crime, we never hear Asian on Asian crime. Would you mind speaking to this notion of black on black crime?
The notion of black on black crime simply comes because regardless of how we want to look at the diversity in America, when you look at groups of people, they typically are living and breathing and really being active in places and spaces that look like them for the most part. Like, even though America is diverse, black people live around black people, white people live around white people, Asians live more so around Asians, or they might live in a more mixed community, right? But blacks and whites are definitely going to be separated. Like, that's just something, especially coming from my experience here in the South. Black people moving to a neighborhood is white flight. So then when it comes to black on black crime, that's just really a myth, because it's like it's not like I'm choosing to commit a crime against a black person. I'm committing a crime in the area in which I live, and I'm sorry that the people around me are black. Like, that ends up being the circumstance. But they like to say black on black crime because what it does, it it demoralizes the whole effort of saying Black Lives Matter. It demoralizes the whole effort that blacks love blacks. It demoralizes that entire movement because you're going to look at, well, you are killing each other. So what happens? It's like, well, white people shoot white people too. I know white people who rob white people. I know Asians who rob Asians. Like, so we all can say we know people who are robbing and killing and committing crimes in their communities against people that look like them, but that's only brought up with black people, and that's kind of unfair. It's only done because we have blacks trying to make an effort to say, like, this is being done specifically against us. And you only hear black on black crime when people talk about the system of oppression in which blacks are forced to be in a life of crime. I just think it adds to the system. It's the system just trying to figure out another way to silence a black voice.
I would like to add a little bit more to the previous comment. The black on black crime was brought up by a black woman on social media, and it's something that's trending more viral. I'm seeing a lot of people sharing it, saying like, why is it that Black Lives Matter, but it's only when it's killed by a white cop? That seems to be the narrative that was being pushed there. And they wanted to make sure that we did say that part as well. And I also saw another video of another black lady screaming at white people that were at the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that they are not oppressed anymore. I think that's what she was saying. Like, why do they care now when it's, you know, their own people killing their own?
It only kind of is brought up when you're trying to disprove or devalue something else.
Exactly.
I've only ever heard that come up in conversation, like when we're talking about people being killed disproportionately by police brutality. Like, yes, it's disproportionately black and African Americans. And then you come to healthcare. It's statistically, blacks are dying at a higher rate. So the only time I think I've ever had that all lives matter and the black on black crime response has been in response to saying, why don't these bodies matter as much as other bodies?
And that's absolutely true. And I think it's, like I said, ignorance is bliss. If you don't live in these neighborhoods, if you don't live in the black neighborhoods where blacks are dying against blacks, like, you wouldn't understand that they do matter. Like, we don't put people's faces on T-shirts because they don't matter. We don't we don't have these gatherings and these barbecues and these things trying to celebrate somebody's life because they don't matter. Just because the media doesn't expose it, just because the media doesn't talk about it, the black lives that we lose to our own, whether it be gang violence, whether it be robbings, whether it be other shootings, like the black lives that we lose to that's in our communities, we still care. But we're not talking to anybody else about it because it was nobody else's fault but our own. So why am I going to go talk to white people about something that happened in my community that was done by my people? I don't have to. I can just talk to my people about it. We talk about stopping the gang violence. We talk about stopping selling drugs in our community. We talk about that, but we talk about it amongst ourselves because, let's be real, the reason why we got the guns and the drugs was it was put there by white people in the first place. Like it wasn't like we had the ability to go get the drugs and the weapons and bring them to our neighborhoods. No, they were put there by white people. So why am I going to talk to you about a problem that you started? Like, I'm going to just talk to us, educate us, and get us to stop using what you've given us. Like, you've given us the tools of destruction. We're going to stop using your tools, and we're going to start creating tools of creation.
Do you ever get tired of feeling like you're constantly educating people? Because I do feel like every time we speak, it always ends up as kind of a lecture.
Right.
Not in a bad way.
In a way, at first I used to, not in a bad way. At first I used to feel like, yes, this is extremely tiring, until I realized that it's a blessing because somebody wants to be educated. Like, regardless of, like, the fact that it is exhausting having to recount, you know, black events. It is exhausting having to recount my own negative experiences, and that does hurt, but it's like, this is a blessing. This is an opportunity because not everybody wants to have those conversations. Some people are just going to remain bigots and remain ignorant because they choose to do that. But for each and every person that wants to learn more, who wants to engage in that difficult conversation, whether they're right or wrong of where they stand, it's an opportunity for me to say, did you ever look at it from this perspective? And if they didn't, let's show them why this perspective also matters. So, I don't know. I used to get tired, but now, like, I look forward to those moments when people want to challenge me or people want to have those conversations. It's like, okay, let's do it. I hope you're ready because I'm about to bring out all the guns. I'm bringing all of them.
Okay, so speaking of guns and challenges, one of the topics that we were kind of debating amongst ourselves is the idea of defunding the police, starting with the San Diego police, which has its own kind of things. But to contrast, we were looking at the statistics of the NYPD and how they spend over $1 billion on the NYPD. And everything else, like education, housing, equity, homeless shelters, child welfare, and food stamps, all of that put together has a lower budget than the NYPD. So when it comes to defunding the police, what would be your take on that?
Defunding the police, defunding the prison industrial complex needs to happen. Because what's happening is you're putting more money into policing bodies that aren't doing anything wrong. It's like you're looking for a problem. Like the more money you pour into it, the more you're forcing people to go find a problem. That's why you have stop and frisk, which became a huge thing in New York. Like you have these things because you're pouring money in and telling them to do it, and you're telling them to do it disproportionately to black and brown bodies. You're funding them to go out and cause problems for black and brown people while it's going to protect and serve white people. Like that becomes an issue, and you're just pouring too much money into that. That we spend more money policing nonviolent crimes and drug charges than we actually do putting away real criminals. So that's a problem. It lets you know there's too much excess money there. And if you put more money into an education system, for instance, as a former teacher, like if you put money into an education system, you wouldn't have the number of criminals coming about because people will find other ways to live. People will find other ways to get the success they want, get the money they want, have the access they want. But no, when you're funding building more jails because you're looking at second and third grade test scores, and that's how you think, oh, this person's automatically going to become a prisoner. When you start doing that, you're only really just feeding yourself. Like you're funding yourself to make more criminals. Like you want to make criminals. You don't want to make productive citizens. You don't want to make people that's going to pour good things into the world. You want to make criminals. There's no reason why we have these zero tolerance rules for black and browns in school, and that's pushing them out of school and into prison. Like, come on. Like all of the funding towards the police and the prisons needs to decrease because they're not really doing what they're supposed to do with it. Like you're not doing the right thing. You're creating problems rather than solving them.
Yeah, especially because a large number of the police funding goes to settlement and misconduct lawsuits.
That comes out of taxpayer money, not the department itself.
Exactly.
Oh, I
so
did not
then
know that
that
part.
whole taxpayer money situation circles back to this problem of like the black on black violence. Like you're in these communities, and suddenly if they don't have enough money from the very beginning to be able to build up the people like education and all that, it's like then in the long run that's kind of what it leads to. And again, it's just like the controlling of trying to get more prison, bodies in there rather than just saying, hey, let's have reform from the start. So that's like a huge part of why this defund the police is like a big thing right now, is because we're not talking about just, we want the money, take it away. It's more of, here's how it can be distributed way better for the country.
Yeah, it's about preventing the crimes by making sure that they don't need to commit any crimes. I feel like the narrative outside of the US that people are receiving too is that America that is going through all these protests and they're rioting, they're destroying, property, they're setting things on fire. That appears to be what the media is pushing and is how people are seeing us.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to people who associate protesters with the rioters and arsonists?
Yeah, as a protester yourself, how was your experience protesting?
As a protester, the experience is empowering. You feel united. You feel strong because you're talking in a unified voice. Even if it's not necessarily you speaking, you are agreeing with the statement that is being made through the protest. Honestly, I don't condone the violence and I don't condone the irrational breaking of things, but I'm not mad at those who choose to riot. And honestly, because no one told the KKK to stop. No one told the KKK they couldn't kill us. So why all of a sudden when black people we decide we want to be angry, we got to stop. But when we were being lynched, when we were being burned, when we were being castrated, when we were being pushed out of our homes, like nobody told them to stop. Nobody ever told them to stop.
Yeah,
so
like
people have, when it comes to the riots, when it comes to all of that, when I was a kid, I remember being told a lot, when you're angry, go punch a pillow. Like, go punch a pillow, release that anger, go hit something, right? That is what I remember being told. So now, if that was instructed upon everybody, if everybody living is being told, like, when you get angry, try not to hurt a person, but just break things. Like, if you're told that, eventually that does translate. And now you have adults who probably were told as children, like, you don't have to hurt anybody, but hey, hit a pillow, hit the wall, hit something to release that anger so you don't do something else. And that's what people are doing. Instead of like a lot of these people who are rioting, They could choose the alternative and go start killing, but they aren't. They like I think we have to take that into account. Like they could choose an alternative and hurt people, but they aren't hurting people. They're damaging buildings and things that have insurance, where business owners will literally their insurance is going to cover all the damages. Most of it is glass and windows being broken. Yes, there are some things that are on fire, but insurance covers that. Like business owners get insurance because of these things.
Right.
So it's like not everybody, yes, I understand not everybody benefits, because there are some small business owners who suffered because things get broken. But for the large part, when it's a corporation, when it's these multi-million and multi-billion-dollar corporations and their stuff gets broken or their stuff gets stolen, it's like your insurance is going to cover it. So why am I mad? Just be happy I didn't hurt anybody. Be happy that my anger did not result in me hurting somebody, when just like your racism and your fear of me as a black man resulted in me dying, or resulted in a brother of mine dying because you were fearful or you were angry. You killed a person. I got angry and I broke an inanimate object. I broke an object that really has no value. It was a value put on it by capitalism. A human body has true value. A shirt, a glass, a shoe, jewelry, that doesn't have any real value. That's something that we decided to give it through capitalism. So we're mad at rioters for breaking things, but what about the people dying when us other people get angry?
Right.
Yeah.
There's like the common like thing I always hear. It's like the narrative, the way you're phrasing it. You know, it shouldn't be like, yeah, his death was sad, but the looters though. It should be, yeah, these rioting and looting is annoying, but the killing of unarmed black people needs to stop.
It does seem like there's been a disproportionate anger for the looting and riots, as there has been for the extended amount of time that police brutality has been allowed to survive.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it seems like people are more worried about material things than life itself.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes into a sort of institutionalized racism, where everything is very ingrained, and it is so normal to us as people that people don't realize that your feelings towards this, especially your feelings towards black and brown bodies, is racist, even if you don't realize it is. And Lamar, I actually did want to speak to you on it, because we did have an encounter some years back when we first met that I have not haven't been able to stop thinking about. And it was, you were debating on speaking at a seminar between Ghana and South Africa. And you weren't initially going to do it until you found out that another white classmate had used the N-word. I actually kind of wanted to speak on that because you had so much to say. You did have a lot of things that we really did want to hear you speak about. But that's what piqued your interest. So if we could go over what you said again on why that's such a racially charged word and why that kind of seems to be taking the mainstream by storm right now. Because I know it's been used against my friends recently to an extent that I have never seen before, either because I'd never heard it before or I just hadn't noticed it before. But please tell me more about the deal on the N-word and why that's such a racially charged word.
Man, for black people, I want everybody to understand, for blacks in America, black is we use black, but there's a diaspora, the African diaspora, everybody who originated in Africa and spread across the globe. The N-word in itself was used to ascribe an identity, a dehumanized identity to blacks. It was used to dehumanize us so that we would be treated and seen as chattel, as livestock, as expendable. And for a long time, that was the history of what we were in this country. Of course, the genealogy of the word, there's negus, which comes from, I want to say it was Ethiopian, which was royalty, right? Negus was royalty. And that word empowers, that word empowers black. But the N-word, to use nigger or nigger, to use that term, and you're not a part of our community, at this stage, you have to understand you don't have that right. We've taken control of the word in itself, and we use it how we see fit because it was ascribed to give us an identity. So we've taken it and we've morphed the identity. We've taken it and we've changed that identity. We're no longer allowing the world to tell us who we are and what we have to be. So we took that word with it. We took our identity and we took the word with it. And that's why if you're not a part of our community, you should not be using it. Like, I don't care I don't care how many black friends you've had. I don't care if you've been raised by blacks. I don't really care if you're not black. If it doesn't run in your blood, don't use the word, because it's not right. I'm not going to go use words and slurs, even in fun or joking, that have been used to degrade another person if I'm not a part of that community. Like, I don't have the right to use that word, so why would I do it? I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine, and we were talking about using the F word and using the N word, and how the F word is ascribed to the homosexual community and the N word is ascribed to the black community, and how when people who are not a part of either community use the word, it's offensive, but people inside the community can use the word, and it's okay. It's okay, because you will never have, if you use the N word and you're not black, you will never ever have to experience what it means to be black. You will never ever have to experience that. If you're not black, you never have to experience it, meaning you don't really know the power in that word. You don't really know the history of that word. You don't know the experience. You don't know what it feels like to be a nigga. You don't. So why are you using it? Why do you think it's okay? Why do you think it's funny? Because you don't know what that means. You don't know what it's like to be followed in stores just because you walked in and you were black. You don't know what it's like to be stopped by police because you're black driving in a white neighborhood. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you're driving in a white neighborhood and they don't like you over there. You don't know what that means, so why are you trying to use the word like it's okay? Yes, people have been oppressed in many different ways, and people come from many, many similar situations. But at the bottom line, if you're not black, don't use it. And it goes for any term that has been used to degrade anybody. If you're not from the community and you did not take that word, your community did not take that word back to empower yourselves against a system that's trying to systematically create genocide, don't use it. Don't use it.
I saw a comment the other day, this girl from Argentina, and I saw also like a lot of people in Asia who are huge fans of hip hop. I know was Big Brian. He's an Asian rapper as well. He used to go by a different name, and for them, that word was part of the music that they listened. They saw it as cool, basically. What do you say to people outside of the U.S. who do use that word because they are so influenced by your culture
Without realizing.
without realizing the context of it?
For those outside the country, stop loving our culture and not loving us. Because I've been around the world. I've been to different countries, and I still feel a lot of the same hate. I remember being in Burma, going to the pagodas and taking a tour, and a local said some derogatory things in the native language. I don't speak the native language. So I asked my tour guide what was said, and he said, I can't tell you because of how disrespectful it is. Wow. So in other cultures, I want you to understand, just because you're not white, it doesn't mean your culture doesn't hate us as much, because I've seen it and I've felt it. Being black anywhere outside of Africa is dangerous. You're not accepted anywhere. And that's just a fact. We're not really truly wholeheartedly accepted. There are groups, there are places we can find peace, there are places where we can find success, there are places where we can find, a life that we can live, but to be in totality accepted, I haven't found anywhere, and I haven't seen anywhere except the continent of Africa, in which blacks are fully accepted. Wow. So if you love hip hop culture, that's fine. It's all dandy. I would never tell you not to love that culture, because it has a huge influence. It's a lot of great things that have come from hip hop, but still don't use the term, because you still don't know what it's like to be us. And the music that we're speaking from, the reason why we're using these words is because, again, most of the people that you're listening to are black. It's not, and most of the people you're listening to are black. And if there's a non-black artist that uses the word, I have some problems with them. I have a lot of problems with them. So it's just don't. I understand the appreciation for what has been created, and the appreciation for the art form, and the appreciation for what it can do. It can create a lot of success for somebody who's talented at it. But still, just don't use the word. It's not okay. Don't use the word, because your culture, in some way, shape, or form, colonialism happened. Europe colonized pretty much the entire world. That's a real thing. Post-colonialism, the darker you are, the worse off you are. And you see this when you go to different countries and they have lightning cream. Like they have cream that makes you lighter. You want to be a lighter shade, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. People want to be white.
To speak on going around the world, and specifically on your feeling of acceptance in the continent of Africa, I do want to point out that in South Africa, there still were remnants of apartheid. I do remember walking around with some friends, and people were looking at us funny. South Africa was the only place that I personally had ever been to where they had whites, blacks, and coloreds. So you wouldn't have to be white, you wouldn't have to be black, but you still had to put this in a very negative term, like a place. Because I'm not black, I'm not white, but I was colored when I went there. And that's not something I experienced anywhere else. And that's something in juxtaposition to the United States of America. When I visited the South, I did not live there. I don't have a lived experience of being there. I only had a very brief experience there. But it did feel very black and white because people called me white because I wasn't black. But I do remember feeling very out of place because of it. Because I can't claim a culture that I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it does get difficult when you're navigating the mode of interracial relationships because, again, I am not black. And I am kind of inserting myself into a black culture that I know nothing really, truly, deeply about. Yeah, that's basically why we called you in on here.
That's Southern narrative, right? I hate that it is what it is. Like, I really hate it. But to give context, understand that people immigrated to the United States. Mostly they were coming through New York and through California, I believe, in immigration. Like, you didn't have, like, a Southern port of immigration. Like, nobody came through the South in immigration in the sense of what was the major movements into America. Now, with that being said, you still had the large majority, if not all, of the slaves that were ever in the United States came through the South. So when you don't have that, it creates the narrative of like, well, the only people here are the black people and the white people because that's the only people that we've seen for majority of our history. So when people start migrating to the South, when we really start culture mixing after, slavery, post 1865, really around after the 1900s, when immigration is a really huge thing here and everybody's moving around in the country, that's when you start having more cultures be exposed. But for the majority in the South, the history was white and black. That's who you saw. That's who it was. And that created the narrative there. And the battle was always between white and black. It's not that people don't see and recognize that there are other cultures. I just think in the South, because that narrative has been predominantly white and black for so long in history, they're essentially telling you when you come, like, you have to pick a side. Like, you have to pick a side. Which side are you going to stand on? Because there's a battle constantly in the South for what happened after integration. After integration, you have Jim Crow. You have this legal separation and segregation. You have the killings, you have the lynchings, you have all this campaign of fear and terror that sweeps the South. And it's like black versus white. Nobody was there to protect us. Nobody was there to be the middle ground. Nobody was there to having those conversations to help mitigate that. So it becomes a black and white narrative in the South. But everywhere else it's a little different because there is a melting pot everywhere else, it seems. It seems that being raised in the South but having traveled all over, there's literally a very small percentage of anything that's not black or white in the South. There, like, even in the school I taught, we had pretty much it was 50-50 black and white. Of course, there were you have a Hispanic community. You have an Asian American community. And I don't even like Asian American because Asia is a continent which has so many different people.
Yeah.
So many different people. And so I hate that term. This is just stop the semantics. So it's just like it becomes a very difficult conversation when the large majority of everybody around you is either black or white. So for children that grow up in the South, for people who spend majority of their time in the South, I think it's part ignorance. Like, they don't see a lot more of other people. So even if you look a little different, it's like, well, you're close to white or you're close to black for me. I don't know anything else.
In our chat right now, they're saying that you're making Southern U.S. sound like the Confederacy in the 21st century.
It technically is. Let's not play games and act like that's not what it is. It still has remnants of all of that Confederate pride. There was in Birmingham, Alabama, they just removed a Confederate statue that
Right.
loomed over a predominantly black community. Like, we as black people, we see the Confederate flag all over the South. If it wasn't the Confederacy of the 21st century, we wouldn't see the flag. Like, we
Yeah.
wouldn't. And when you look at a lot of the southern states and how their flags are made, a lot of them are made as remnants of the Confederate flag. A lot of the state flags are remnants of the Confederate flag. So you can't tell me the southeastern region of the United States isn't the 21st century Confederacy. It is. It is. It's just doing it. Alabama gerrymandering, the way they cut their lines in voting so that black votes don't count, or they don't count as much as white votes. When we integrated black people into the white system, integration wasn't about mixing evenly. Integration was about taking blacks and putting them in the white system. And now that we have to account for your humanity in our system, we're going to create laws and legislations and rules to where you have as little power as we can give you. As little power as we want you to have is what you will have in this system. And that's what happens. And that's what thrives in the South. That is what thrives in the South. And that's why the South, like, a lot of people, when you talk about being black and wanting to be in politics, and you're coming, like, I remember saying I wanted to be in politics here, and it was like, oh, it's a good old boy system. You know, it's not something you can just jump into. Like, you have to understand, like, this is a red state. They want this. And it's like, why? Like, why can't I just be black and want to represent people? Why can't I want to fight for equity and be here in the South? They're telling me that's not something you do in the South, because the South has a certain way of going. The South has certain rules and regulations. You know, they still call it their Bible Belt. It's a Bible Belt. So it's like, it is the 21st century Confederacy, because the way in which people operate, and it's not all people. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm saying everybody in the South feels this way. I'm not. But when we look at the power structures in the South, it's still a Confederacy.
I do want to comment on another one of the comments that we got in our chat, saying that the Confederate statues shouldn't be removed because they're a part of history. This is just something that I know to be fact. A lot of the Confederate statues that were erected were not erected directly after the Civil War. Obviously, the majority of Confederate statues actually were erected during the time that Martin Luther King Jr. walked Selma, Alabama. So the Confederate statues were very much constructed as a power structure to kind of prove that this is the Confederacy, these are the people that we consider to be our heroes. So
so like a display of force at that point, similar with having
like
the burning crosses.
The modern day version of it is them saying, like, you know, blue lives matter, all lives matter, anything to combat whenever there's a protest going on for Black Lives Matter, and essentially erecting the statues at that time was for that. So that's interesting to know. I don't think a lot of people realize
that's a very important thing to note when people kind of put the idea out that you shouldn't tear down these structures because they're part of history. Yes, they're a part of history. The history was they were erected to assert a sense of dominance over predominantly black communities and the white ones.
Yep.
But that's just a comment on that chat.
It's crazy that people always, like, whenever you have the conversation about the Confederate flag or the Confederate nation, the monuments, the statues, the names, the parts, all of that, right? When you have those conversations that people want to talk about how it's part of history, it brings to me one question. What about the rest of history that we want to sweep under the rug? The Native American history, the Black history, the history of the Japanese internment camps. Why do we talk about how we ignored and we knew the Holocaust was happening, but as America, we ignored that until cameras came? Like, why don't we talk about that history? Why is it that we want to empower the history of dominance over blacks, but we never want to empower the dark history of America and how America has not been what it's telling you in the history books? We don't ever want to talk about the real history. We want to talk about the glossiness. We want to keep, again, it seems to me that it's an idea of white supremacy. You want to keep that idea in American history, but everybody else can be swept under the rug. Everything else can be broken. How long did it take for us to get MLK in the Washington Mall? Like, come on. Like, that alone was a fight. Like, that was a fight. For us to get an African American History Museum by the Smithsonian, like, why did it take so long? And it's these things where history pops up all over the place, and it's all well and good, but as long as it's not history that's going to empower somebody that's not white, that becomes the issue. Like, you want to take history, let's talk history, but let's not be blinded to any part of it. Let's talk all of it. Let's talk every single bit of history if we're going to talk history.
Of
Don't
course,
try
and
to
it's
just
the
say
idea that you
it's a
gotta be
part of it.
uncomfortable to grow. Yeah. I actually have not, obviously, I did not grow up in the American education system, and I definitely don't know what it was, what the education system was like.
Me
in
and
the
Josh
South.
can probably give our view on that based on our
Yeah.
education.
But I do know one of the big arguments that I learned in college was the idea that the Civil War was fought, was it to free the slaves, or was it to keep state laws?
Oh, state rights.
State rights.
Is what I keep hearing.
Yeah. But wasn't the state rights about keeping slaves? Or am I misunderstanding that?
The states' rights was the right to own slaves. Like, people love to play that semantics game, but it's a Southern thing, and I honestly, I'm not mad because I understand. When you're taught something and you are proud of something, you don't want to hear the negative things. It's like a child and his parent. As a child, you don't want to hear anything negative about your parents, because if your parent is a golden statue in your eyes, you don't want any smudges on that statue. Like, that's your parent. Like, they're awesome, no matter what. And for a lot of people, a lot of white people from the South, like, that's what it is. Like, even though the Civil War happened, and we really know the main reason was because Abraham Lincoln was talking about ending slavery. And so the Confederacy, they were like, we're not with it. And they love to say, oh, it's just states' rights and that. And it's like, no. Because if it was about states' rights, you could have fought that. You could have fought that inside the legislature. You could have argued why. You could have done that. You could have done that battle inside the legislature. You left because if a law came down of freeing the slaves and allowing the enslaved people to be free and educated and have rights, like, you would have to follow through with that. And they just weren't with it. And even Abraham Lincoln, when it came down to it, he didn't really want to do it because he knew what was going to happen. He ended up doing it for a war tactic. And that's fact. Like, he did it for a war tactic.
So what I'm hearing is that black bodies have always been kind of used as commodity and as a tactic rather than as human. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Absolutely.
So you both like North and South in that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then the whole state's just caught up in that.
That is it.
Yeah, because don't forget, just because slaves were able to escape the South and move north doesn't mean that they had rights still.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it became a long battle after that still.
It still wasn't like we were human. Like, when everything was written, we were 3/4 of a human. We were 3/4 man. So it's like, come on, a lot of the American history we weren't included in when it comes to building this country, the laws and everything. We were only included to be subjugated. We were never included to be empowered.
I want to ask you one more question, just kind of to prove a point, because this actually was a question that was posed in my college class when I was still attending. Someone, while we were discussing, Uncle Tom's Cabin and the subjects of race and discrimination, the one black person in the class had basically said, every black person, ask any black person, African American person about their cop story. They all have a cop story. And that particular girl, she was stopped on her way into the school because the cop didn't believe that she went to our school.
Wow. Jeez.
So I just want to know, to speak truth to the matter, do you yourself have a cop story? Because I know you have outside of the state stories.
Definitely got outside of the state stories with law personnel. I do have cop stories. I mean, which one do you want to hear? I can talk about.
Well, he's got some
stories.
He's got a list. He's pulling out his folders.
I can talk about when I was 18 and my friend and I were riding around in a neighborhood. We had gotten lost. We took the wrong turn and we were riding around in a predominantly white neighborhood. We didn't do anything illegal. We didn't have any guns, no drugs, no nothing. We were young kids. We had snapbacks on, we had hats on, and we didn't have tinted windows. All of a sudden, we get pulled over, and two cops get out the car. One comes to my side, and one comes to his. The cop talking to him, is saying, like, you're driving left to center. First of all, I've never heard anybody getting pulled over for driving left to center. I didn't even know that was a thing.
What?
I didn't even know that was a thing.
I don't know what that is.
So they run down asking him all these questions, and then the other cops start asking me questions like, where's your ID? Do you have any weapons in the car? Are you on drugs? Do you have any drugs? Do you have any alcohol? And I'm like, I'm not even driving the car. Why are you talking to me? I shouldn't even be interacting with you.
Wow.
The hell?
Then he starts talking. Then I give him my driver's license, and he asks me if I'm in college. And I tell him I'm in college, and he starts talking about me drinking a lot of alcohol. I'm like, sir, if you read my ID, I'm underage. Why would I even? First of all, if I did drink at that time, why would I admit it to a cop? And you see I'm underage. But secondly, as a cop, you see I'm underage. Why are you trying to ask me these type of questions? So it becomes like this thing of where they were looking to get us in trouble. Like they asked, could they search the car? And he said, no, here's the only thing I got. And he showed them he had a little knife in his glove compartment. It's like, that's it. That was it. And they let us go. Like, no tickets, no nothing. They just let us go after they asked us all these questions. I remember being pulled over in Alabama because we forgot to turn our turn signal on. And the cop comes out and he's trying to search the car, saying we got drug residue everywhere. And it's like, we don't even do drugs, sir. Like, where is all this coming from? Again, once they can't find anything, they just let us go. I've been pulled over multiple times by cops for no good reason, questioned, highly questioned, and I can say, like, we've remained calm in most of those situations. We didn't get an attitude, and we knew, like, if we want to get out of this,
I don't think you were allowed to get an attitude. You wouldn't have been able to get away with it.
Despite the fact that it would have been justified.
We knew what was at stake every time we got pulled over, and it was always, I was always with one other person or a group of people. It was never just me that was pulled over. And thank God for that, because I don't know what interactions happen when I'm just wrongfully pulled over and it's just me. I don't know what would happen. So,
were you ever taught how to deal with police, or did you kind of learn that on your own?
For me, my grandmother was a law enforcement officer, so she was a probation parole officer, and so she told me some things growing up about being respectful and don't do this. So I kind of knew, like, the general. I didn't get the hands on the steering wheel, don't move too fast. I didn't get those type of talks. That I actually heard from friends. Like, that I actually learned, like, talking to my friends in college. I just knew that I had to talk to them, or, like, I had to be respectful. I did not raise my voice. I did not have a shifty tone. Like, I knew I had to be calm in the situation, thanks to my grandmother, but all the rules of a natural traffic stop, I learned in college. Like, I learned talking to my friends whose parents sat them down and told them, here are the rules of a traffic stop. Here's what you do. I just knew, like, police officers, they might not like me because I'm black, so I have to give them every reason to smile and be happy with me.
So you have to try harder to get people to like you because of your skin color.
Yeah, like, I'm going to be extra polite when they walk up to my car. Like, I'm being extra polite to you because I don't know if you're having a bad day or not. And if you're having a bad day, you might want to shoot me. I'm sorry. So I'm trying to put a smile on your face before we do anything else.
Wow.
Do you have to put on a white voice?
My dad told me to talk in a white voice from a young kid.
Ever since, even before I had my license, I was taught how to react, how to act when it comes down to it. And it was the craziest thing for me the day that I was in the car with a friend of mine, a white friend, and she was just talking so much. I was like, why are you pulling me over? I was like, girl, you're gonna get me killed, like, in the back. And, like, he started asking me questions as well. And, like I said, I felt like I had to use a white voice, which was speaking in a higher tone, as though,
Sounding more pleasant.
Not seeming aggressive.
Yeah.
Or anything.
Like taking your hands out of your pocket.
Slang.
Yeah, is that something that you feel like you have to do as well?
I wouldn't say I feel like I have to. I think it's just natural. I don't know. I feel like it's natural because I think naturally as a black person, when you grow up, Ta-Nehisi Coates does a really good job in his book Between the World and Me of how blacks grow up in two different worlds, and we naturally learn how to code switch without thinking about it. We're code switching. We're changing the way we talk. We're changing the words we use. We're changing the mannerisms we have depending on what group of people we are around. When I go when I'm in my community with my people, I might talk and act a little more calmly. I might be more of myself genuinely because without fear of anything happening to me. But as soon as I step into a space that I know is white, naturally, without thinking about it, my mind, the way I talk, the way I act, it switches because I don't know what's going to happen. I already know there's bias in this space. Like, I already know. So when I come in, naturally, I'm trying to defeat your bias, and I'm trying to be the best version that I can be. But I know what that means. Like, I have to appease you. I hate that it happens. I hate that that's what it has to be. But naturally, I'm code switching to appease the space I'm in.
So I have one last question. We're hoping that some change happens as a result of this movement, that there's going to be reform in the police department. What can they do to help you feel safe to help you feel like you don't have to be constantly worrying that it may kill you, arrest you on, or
You don't
use
have to
any
be
of the.
scared about the one day you get pulled over and you don't have company in your car.
Yeah.
Are you asking like what should the police do right now? What should this whole movement lead to essentially, like the end result?
Yeah. What can the police do to
The-
help in these type of situations? Do you think it's something that can be solved overnight, or is it something
Nah,
that?
it's nothing that would be solved overnight because there are rules. Like President Obama even had the 21st century like police task force where they were trying to figure out how to, better police communities, right? Like they had a task force for that. They do things. They get the body cameras, and then you hear that they're telling people turn your body cameras off, leave your body camera in the car. Like we hear these things, and we know that's happening. So honestly, the only thing that the police force across the country can do is give me consistency with not killing black people. Give me consistency. Give me the same level of love and appreciation that when a white boy walks into a church and murders out of cold blood non-black people, and you just carry them out in handcuffs. Give me that same level of love. Give me that same level of consistency when a black person does something wrong. Give me that same level of consistency and make it consistent. I shouldn't be able to go find. There should be no reports. Nobody should be going missing. None of that for a long period of time. Then I will stop being feared. Then I will stop living like that. I will stop believing they're going to kill me. But I will never, ever believe the police do not pose a threat to me until the consistency is there, where there hasn't been any innocent killing. There hasn't been any wrongful stops. There hasn't been any wrongful imprisonment. Like when that stuff stops and it's consistent and it's not just hidden, but it stops and it's really gone, then I can stop being afraid. You can make as many rules and write as much policy as you want because we've all seen it. Like police officers, there are laws that say you can't murder, they don't get charged. There are policies that say you can't turn the body cameras off, the body cameras in the car. They always find loopholes, so I don't care about policy anymore. It's not going to do anything because you're just going to find a loophole around it. Give me consistency in your action that you're not going after black bodies, and then we can talk about whether or not I'm going to be at peace with you.
Well said.
That's really well said.
Do you think that means that we need to have a conversation with the police unions?
Yeah. Honestly, I think all parties involved need to be brought to the table to have the conversation. Our judicial system needs to be brought to the table because why aren't you charging these people whether or not they actually get arrested by another police officer? You should be going to charge them. You see it on camera. You know what's happening. Bring them to court. Put a bench warrant out. You put a bench warrant out for me if I don't appear to court for a traffic ticket. But they can walk around after they just killed somebody mercilessly in cold blood, right? So, like, judicial system, police union, police chiefs, sheriffs, all those people need to be at the table. The legislators need to be at the table. Everybody who has any sense of power in the community needs to be at the table because what's going on, police are just acting out a power structure that exists that's above them.
That kind of exists as a testament to a long-lasting, long-standing, very evident process of systemic racism.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, you literally answered all my questions, so it's kind of up to you guys now if you have anything left.
Have any more?
And I don't know. There was some really good answers already put right now in terms of like the general idea right now. Because I had that same question too, kind of in the back of my mind of like the whole end result of like what the protesting is going to solve. Because there's people, that guy in the chat he was saying too. It's just like
because it's more than just because slavery ended does not mean the doctrine of it isn't still suffered
In place.
Yeah.
Too.
So it's kind of, this is more along the lines to kind of obviously educate the general public who understand that just because, at least in the South, things seem very black and white, this is not a black and white issue. I mean, if we had another few more hours, we can go into prejudice and colorism and reverse racism. But that's literally how deep racism goes. So I think that in order to really understand the fear and just the breakdown of police and police brutality, you have to go through all of the depths of racism, and we can't do that. We can't do that in one night. because
Nah,
Lamar can't tell us all of his
that's
police experiences
Yeah.
in one night. I can't tell you all of the things that people close to me have said about me having a black boyfriend in one night, because I think that's my personal frustration to go into like a more opinionated zone, is that people love to use people like me, people like Lamar, people like my boyfriend as their token friend, to say that we're not racist because you're our friend. And I just wanted to point out that it goes so much deeper than that, and I don't want to be your token friend. And the idea that all of my insight on what's going on now didn't happen because I had conversations with my black friends who were smarter, or my group of friends is smarter than other people. It's because I had black friends, period. Because in order for me to learn about this, I had to view it secondhand through them.
Yeah.
And this is why I want to thank you, Lamar, because it really isn't on your black friends to educate you, because this is their trauma, this is their lived experience. But this is why it's so important. Thank you again, Lamar, for literally educating us on all of this, because I didn't want to just call up any black person and be like, tell me about your life, because that would be detrimental to my point.
Right.
Which I think is something that is happening a lot right now. All my black friends are saying now people are trying to have a conversation with them, and they're like, it's not my job to educate you.
Yeah, what about when
Yeah.
we were studying Type P in lit class,
Yeah.
right?
Like, what happened to all those times we hung out, or that you saw me out in the distance, now you want to talk. Or even strangers. I see strangers hitting up other strangers now and be like, is this true?
Right, yeah, I've seen some of that too. I mean, you're probably gonna see a lot of that on the internet. People asking like these, sometimes, like, I'll admit they're like genuine questions for people that need to be educated. Literally today, there was like this Zoom meeting call I had of like some of the coworkers and everything, and like there was this person that was kind of saying like, yeah, what's your experience going on right now, dealing with everything, and she's just like, yeah, I don't really know too much about it. Maybe I should educate myself, but it's like, the privilege to even be able to say that you've never like experienced racism, as opposed to someone who has, like, that's speaks volumes already.
And it goes from ignorance to willful ignorance, because it's one thing to be ignorant because it's never happened to you. And in a sense, that's understandable because you can't control how sheltered you've been. A lot of that's how you were raised. But when you see things are going wrong, and when you choose to just stay in your zone and be like, this doesn't bother me, therefore it's not happening, just because you don't play the game doesn't mean you can't lose. Like the fact that all 50 states and other countries,
I think it was 16 countries last time I checked.
16 countries, one of them is New Zealand, which has its own deep racial tensions with colonialization. Oh yeah. Yeah. The reason why I get frustrated with people, quote unquote, not understanding this is because how can 16 other countries understand this? How can New Zealand understand this? How can Hawaii understand this? How can the UK understand this? But America can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not that. I feel like America just chooses not to. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think when you look at it from look at a microcosm of ourselves as human beings, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot for us to accept the wrong we've done in life. Recently, I had to come to terms with a lot of times I've hurt people, whether knowingly or unknowingly. I've hurt people in my life. So having to reconcile with that took a lot out of me. And I don't think America's just willing to go that far. It's not that we don't understand or America doesn't want to. We refuse to go that far because of how much we've actually done wrong. We love to glorify what we've done and how we've been such a powerhouse and herald of democracy and good living. Let's talk about the real. And America doesn't want to because it knows that's real trauma. To accept that you've started wars, you've killed people, you've been involved in secret dealings behind closed doors. To know the American history is to know that we're not perfect and we're far from anything that the history book is really writing about.
Even things like Malcolm X, like the narrative told about our history, I think that's a huge part of our education system failing, is that we focus on, one aspect. In examples like Columbus, the way we describe Columbus, the narrative behind it, very few teachers focus on the mass genocide and
And
everything
the
that happened.
slavery and the rape
Yeah.
and the STDs.
But no, he sailed the ocean blue and he discovered the United States. Or at least the American.
Yeah,
continent.
sure
Yeah.
did. That's all the narrative they want us to know.
Right.
Well, yeah, thank you for having this conversation with us and educating us. I know I learned a lot through this conversation and even learning more about overseas too. I feel like in the US we're so focused on ourselves that we don't know what's going on in other countries
Yeah,
as
we
well.
we don't draw parallels because the loudest voices, in my experience, to the opposition of Black Lives Matter movement have never been outside the United States. They don't know that it actually kind of, in some ways, is very similar and very different from racism experienced here. But the one parallel that I can draw is that depending on where I was, I can fit in. Because racially I look ambiguous and I'm very light-skinned. I cannot say the same about my black counterparts. I can't. And I've been in situations with Lamar, with friends, where like I have to witness it. I get it. But that's not what I experience. That's what my friends experience. And I want to feel as safe where I go, where my friends go.
Yeah.
Thank you all for even having me. Like, I really appreciate it. Felt good to have this open dialogue. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, I'd love to call on you again sometime.
Definitely. It was a worthwhile experience.
Are
to
you
be
still
able to
running for
have this
president?
conversation.
Oh yeah, Butler for president, 2032. You already know it.
All right,
Alright.
2032 is when
I'll
I'm
mark it on my
up.
calendar.
Okay,
Heck yeah.
I will mark it on my calendar right now.
Sweet.
All right,
We're
well,
going
thank you
here
very
first.
much.
All right, thanks so much, Lamar. I'll talk to you soon.
See you, man.
All right, thank you all. Have a good night.
You,
You
too.
You too.
Wow, that was
Yeah.
that was a powerful conversation. Yeah, that's something that I've realized. You know, a lot of people aren't used to, is having a strong conversation with a person
strong,
of color.
uncomfortable
Yeah,
conversation.
because I'll bring up Charlemagne. The one that's destroyed candidates like Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton. A lot
the
of
Breakfast Club?
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them are not used to talking to somebody who knows their laws. I saw with the Biden one, he specifically told me, like, we're tired of just being heard. What are you going to do for us? Why do you expect our vote immediately?
And that goes right back into what Lamar said, where he's like, you only care about the black community when it's time for our votes.
Yeah.
So you can appeal for votes. You can appeal for you can pander to get people to turn out for the votes. But people aren't going to vote for you if you don't issue any actual change. So that's an insight that I didn't actually initially think of, and I'm glad you said it, because how often do we think of black people as a voting consensus?
Yeah.
How long do we think of them? How often do we think of them as politically relevant? Because we shouldn't. We should think of them as people.
Exactly.
But it's crazy that when you're thinking of how many people are going to vote for you if you're running in a primary, if you're running an election, is that you need this specific group of people to vote for you. And
'Cause-
instead of unifying it, you're like, how can I appeal to this specific group of people?
Or just assuming that they have your vote because they're saying, look at the opposition.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Exactly.
do you want them or do you want us who help you a little bit more rather than actually helping you to the full extent?
Yeah, I feel like the people that are very much trying to still get Trump reelected are kind of using that tactic a lot with Joe Biden, which, I mean, it's like, I kind of like get where some of it's at, because, I mean, Joe Biden said a lot of different things, but it's like Trump himself is shooting himself in the foot a lot for the most recent, actions, especially during this time right now in terms of getting the black vote, so to speak. Y'all hear that thing that he said, really, I think it was today or whatever, he said something about, the economy's opening up, and he basically said, and I bet you George is looking down on us right now and everything,
Oh, yeah,
and he's
please.
smiling about it, and he would be happy. That shit, just made me go, insane when I was hearing that. I'm like...
I think the thing that made me go insane was when he said, if you vote for Trump, you're not black.
Yeah.
Because it goes back
That was
to...
the Biden.
Yeah.
That's what Biden
He was
said.
saying
Trump
Trump.
said this
Oh,
one.
yeah,
So
Trump said
both of
that
them
one.
have said some
Yeah,
pretty crazy,
go ahead.
outlandish things. But that one that Trump just said right now was one that was both a slap in the face to everything the Black Lives Matter is trying to do right now, a slap in the face, honestly, to George and all of his family, and to pretty much anyone who essentially has been killed by the cops that. It's I had like no words when I
Yeah.
first heard that.
And to tout the Bible and to tout religious ideology and to basically say that there's good people on both sides when it came to the Charlottesville riots. Those weren't protests, that was a riot. So let's call it as it is. Charlottesville protest was a riot. That, like, they didn't loot, but they rioted. They killed at least one person because of it. And Trump's response was there's good people there. Trump's response to a peaceful protest going outside of the White House was to tear gas him into oblivion so he could take a picture in front of a church that he never entered.
Yeah.
And one of the preachers who was
with
there
a Bible that you remember
was upside down.
It's a Bible.
Yeah, it was
They
a
asked
Bible
him
that
it
was
his
upside
Bible.
down. So he literally used this church and the Bible as a prop. And if you, especially people in the Bible Belt who have weaponized the Bible against me, against my family, against people of a different skin color.
What is this month about? Right now, Pride, that being the very thing against that a lot of times too.
Yeah, so when it comes to weaponizing the Bible, and when it comes to living your life by the Bible, this is a very gross act of incompetence. This is a very gross act of the thing you should not use the Bible for.
Evangelicals themselves should honestly be very furious about that whole act that he did right now, because he's literally just disgracing, what they considered being the Word of God and all that, But I mean, obviously, they're still gonna look at him.
You saw what Bill Barr. I'm gonna call him out. He's the one that delivered the order for them to clear that area out.
Oh, yeah.
They cleared out the priests, and
the medics and the protests
and his seminary and her seminaries that were there too. He
And
removed people that were practicing their religion from their religious property. It was in the front yard because it got burned, but they were still there supporting and working in their community, and they got tear gas.
They were doing their job.
Yep.
Yeah, they were practicing their religion. I want to put it out there that it was a religious practice at that moment, because that right there was a violation of their First Amendment rights to practice their religion. It was a violation of First Amendment rights of having the ability to protest. This was a First Amendment violation, and it's that right there, if you're religious or not, if you're in the Bible Belt, that right there should make you mad.
Because if you want to practice your religion, you should have the freedom to practice your religion. Especially because that religion is Christianity. This is the religion that everybody has been touting as Americans. That we're American, we're Christian, we love, in God we trust. But people were not allowed to worship God that day.
No.
To the point where the priest who was there had straight up said that she was forced to move out so quickly. She was trying to stay there with the medics because that's what she was doing. She was teaching a sermon. But they had to move out so quickly because of the tear gas, because of the rubber bullets, and because of the incoming militarized police force, that they left their supplies behind. Which means at some point Trump had to step over medic supplies. He had to step over canisters. He had to step over the actual weapons used to terrorize these people outside of their place of worship.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
And I think as someone who went to a Christian school, that frustrates me, because I went to a Christian school to feel safe, and I did not feel safe, not because of my skin color, but because of where I was from. Because as soon as people found out that I wasn't from a rich neighborhood, and they found out, oh, you're from the ghetto. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? We're in the same place. I had to work extra hard to get here, but we're here.
We got the grades to get in here.
Yes.
That means we are intellectually even at that point. Like, they can't say anything about, oh, you're uneducated or anything. No, because it means if you're uneducated, that means the bar was so low that they got in too.
Yes. So, and that's my frustration, is because people automatically assumed that I was there because of affirmative action. People automatically assumed that I was there because I was brown. I speak 4 languages. I graduated with honors. I worked in the community. I helped raise my siblings. All of that went into my college application. What went into everyone else's? If that's how hard I had to work to get into this school, what did you do? Why am I not allowed to be here? Why am I not allowed to be proud? Why am I not allowed to be fully here? All of that went into my college application. So the idea was that I wanted to go to the school because I wanted to be unabashedly Christian. And I was told, because I didn't conform to this level of Christianity, that I was not a Christian at all. So, and that had nothing to do with tear gassing peaceful protesters. It has nothing to do with chasing medics and priests off of their place of worship. It solely had to do from where I was born. And that, although like I know that I'm not the typical demographic of our school because it is predominantly white, and again I'm pretty obviously like not white.
You're not?
No, but in the South I am. In the South but no, it's that continued frustration, and that frustration is nowhere near the level that Black people have to face. Point, period. Because you know this, when my parents first found out that I was dating a black guy, just the rhetoric surrounding it. They were not okay until they found out that he was military, and that's because the military is a predominantly white enforcer. So it's, why did he have to prove himself when he was black? Why couldn't I just have been with someone who treated me very well, who knew how to love me in a way that was very healthy, and we're still together? So clearly this is a healthy relationship. Why do we have to keep proving it? And why does my boyfriend have to be your token of proof that you're not racist?
Things when it comes to like family, I swear, it's like, on one hand, like you want to be like, why do you think this? But at the same time, there's so many like generational things that have been, that formed their opinion.
Oh yeah, and it definitely goes generational. It absolutely is generational, and part of it goes into colorism, is because just because you're brown does not mean you're not prejudiced against other black and brown bodies.
or even against white people too. Like I saw Reynolds, somebody in the chat was saying that like even white people being racist against white people is still being racist. Yes, but
if we're going to be linguistically correct, we do have to call that what it is too. It's not reverse racism. It is prejudice. It's prejudicism. Yeah. So it is absolutely possible to be prejudiced toward, if you're not white, towards white people. But it's not possibly racist towards white people, because racism is based off of a long-standing generational series of oppression. Yeah. And in the United States, white people have never been oppressed. Exactly. So if someone you say is being racist towards white people, that you have to start imbuing that into your linguistics. You have to start understanding where that's from. It's not racism towards white people, it's prejudice. People are prejudiced towards white people. They're colorist towards white people. They're colorist towards people of a darker caste. But racism is racism is a system of oppression. That goes from institutional to a structural to an interpersonal and an internalized level. You can internalize prejudice. You can't institutionalize prejudice, because to that level, white people will not face racism in anywhere at this point in time to the same level as black and brown people, black people especially.
And see, this is like a concept that, I mean, like, a lot of people should understand by now, but I think there's so much, especially when it comes to people that just don't want to, like, accept that hard truth, and they just want to still be like, oh, well, I've suffered too. It's like that same thing of people that have, like, been in South Africa, come back, it's like, I've, survived through, racism ideas and stuff too. It's
and it becomes at that point, why is it a competition?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do you have to suffer more than black people when you have not? Because I remember when I told my boyfriend that, like, what was said about him in my family, the goal was to tell him to be honest, because I'm like, this is your ticket to run away right now. And he said, I'm from Alabama, I'm used to it. Damn. Those are his exact words. And he didn't say that he said it very calmly, he said it very coolly, and that was literally the end of the conversation on his point. Because and I pushed it for a little bit. I was like, You're allowed to be mad. What do you have to say about that? And it wasn't that he was hiding his emotions. That was his emotion. He was like, it's happened before. I'm used to it. And that's not okay.
Yeah, just the fact that you're used to it does not mean it's okay.
Well, yeah, but like what we were talking about right now with him on the phone, like he's like, I could just code switch instantly. It's just like how we, grown up to do. Shouldn't be the case that he has to, but that just became, the common thing at that point.
And I do think that also, that's a linguistics thing, because that happens to people who speak more than one language, because this kind of happens at home. And that's why I kind of related to when he said it, obviously not to the same extent, but the way that I speak to white people versus the way that I speak to, to you guys,
me,
versus the way that I speak to people in Hawaii. It's all different.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's all code.
Culture.
And the problem comes from people trying to criminalize that code that you're switching. So if they hear you speaking like jive, they're going to be like, oh, you sound black.
Yep.
My favorite instance of that experience with you and your friend from Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
Was actually during Pride. We were at a bar, and you guys were speaking Pidgin.
Yeah.
Which I know Pidgin sounds like it's crazy, but it's an
real
actual language. And you guys got kicked out.
We got kicked out because the security guard had never heard that language before, and he was saying, "You guys are being disorderly."
You guys are you guys are too
Sound like
drunk.
it was drunken speak, essentially, is what they
Because
kind of
it does
assumed.
sound like
It
a
does
drunk
sound
one.
like it is.
I will admit, if you've never heard of it, if you're a native English speaker, it sounds kind of like you're just throwing words together.
And it did not help. Like
It
he was
didn't help
asking
that
me
we
like,
were in
how
a
much?
bar.
Like, are your friends okay? I'm like, oh, don't worry, they're just speaking Pidgin. They're speaking. And the guy looks at me. He's like,
He's like, "No,
get
you're
out.
drunk."
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's that obviously that's a very minor instance, and that's something I can tell
Yeah.
at parties now because that was a joke.
Right.
But let's play this out on a big scale here.
Yeah.
You're speaking comfortably to your friend. Someone else in a position of authority is threatened by the fact that they can't understand you. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
We were that I can remember. We weren't throwing drinks. We weren't starting fights. We
No.
weren't instigating anything. It
Yeah.
was the idea that
We were
I
giving
can't-
them money.
Yeah, the idea that
Here's my
I
money.
can't understand you, therefore what you're saying must be criminal.
Mm.
So and I want to point that out that I got out of that safe. I'm fine. I did not I didn't get physically thrown out by the security guard or anything. And looking back, I can understand his scenario. Like he's trying to do his
Actually,
job.
they did threaten to move you out. Physically.
But
they at least gave me a warning. I'm like, all right, come on, guys, come on, guys.
but at the same time, I couldn't code switch fast enough.
Yeah.
So I didn't fully understand what they were saying because in my mind I'm having a comfortable conversation with someone who's I'm finally talking to someone who speaks my language.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find that outside of Hawaii, and I did. So just imagine for a second that I was not as safe as I was. And I think about that all the time because once I hear about instances like Lamar said where you get pulled over by a cop, it makes you think about every single time you got pulled over by a cop, about every single instance that was potentially life-threatening for your friend was fine for you. Mm-hmm. That's privilege. That's the privilege I was afforded, and that was because I grew up in a very, very diverse demographic, and I knew the cops that pulled me over. They knew my parents, and that's why I got away.
Yeah.
But I did not grow up in America. I didn't grow up in this United States.
Continental
I didn't
US.
grow up in the continental U.S. No.
Yeah. And it's not even just for me personally, Spanish triggers a lot of people for some reason.
I was literally about to say, I was like, you get like this, random lady in the store who's white. They overhear someone maybe speaking Spanish in the other aisle, and suddenly they're immediately trying to get at them, like, oh, speak English.
Yeah, or I've had people say like, why are you talking, crap about me? I'm like, I don't care about you enough to put in energy of hate toward you. You apparently care so much that you're putting in all this extra energy to just disrupt.
Was it a white person that asked that?
Yeah.
And that's where
It was a Karen.
It
It
goes
was a
back to
Karen.
the privilege because if something's not going on to you, it's going on about you. So because she never learned Spanish, she never went out of her way to figure out another culture, to understand anything outside of her realm of understanding, everything else becomes a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it becomes dangerous because this is where we have our understanding and then we have these protests that we might not understand.
Yeah.
So this is outside your realm of understanding. Is it a threat to you? Or is it something that you need to learn? Because if you think that somebody's talking crap about you in Spanish, learn Spanish.
Yep.
Learn Spanish. See if they're talking crap about you.
No, and going with that, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of white supremacists right now who are seeing these protests, they're seeing them saying Black Lives Matter, and they automatically, as to them, they interpret it as, that means that my life doesn't matter, I'm in danger.
Oh, that
And that's why
actually
they
just
keep,
happened in our chat.
and that's why they keep
Yeah.
saying like hashtag All Lives Matter, because they're so afraid of being removed from the conversation, of losing something, losing some form of power.
They're losing the superiority.
Yeah.
That's where it becomes all lives matter. And I understand that sentiment because you want all lives to matter. But that's what this is saying, is because they're not saying Black Lives Matter more. They're not saying Black lives are best. They're saying Black lives matter. They matter.
Whoa! Check out that like feed. Oh, is that Portland? Yeah,
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
like they're all like circling around.
This is Portland, Oregon.
Dang,
Damn.
that is tight.
I
Yeah,
really
it's
hope they're
getting
wearing
pretty
masks.
interesting.
I know, because even the guy in the comment is like, yeah, coronavirus is still very much a thing, and it very much is. The thing is, though, it's like,
But so is
had
police
we,
brutality.
yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
had we not,
And they both affect minority communities a lot more.
yeah, had we not even had these protests going on, we wouldn't have even had it to the point where, people like the officer that was charged for George Floyd's death, he wouldn't have even got to the point where he was actually charged for second-degree murder at this point now, and the other officers around him too. It's like people were put up into a corner right now at this point because of the fact that, yes, we are stuck inside quarantine, but now our own people are dying again. Are we just supposed to stay inside still at this point when reality, like protesting actually is going to work? It's an unfortunate thing that has to happen, essentially.
And like
It
we
is a
said
breaking
yesterday,
point.
and like we said yesterday, if it wasn't for coronavirus, I don't think this would have gotten the attention it did. If it wasn't for everybody
Probably
being
not.
stuck indoors, having nothing to do, no new content being made, no sports, no going to the movies, no distractions, that's why people are paying attention now.
Especially because, it's almost a weird, thing how it happened on Memorial Day as well. That tends to be a weekend where a lot of those activities are happening, where everyone's
Yeah.
distracted in the country and not even remembering what that actual holiday's about anyways, too. And so that happens, and suddenly it's just like, boom, there's so much to unpack there when it comes to this happening in America.
And I want to say, because it's Memorial Day, it's to remember the veterans who have died, who have passed away.
Exactly.
But
And
that does include the veteran. Like,
Yeah,
there
that's
was
what I
a
was gonna
veteran
say right
that died at the hands of police, and he was shot so many times that the police body cam actually caught them laughing, saying this is going to be a closed casket funeral.
ooh, I didn't hear that part.
Oh, I heard that part.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets dicey for me, is because you come in with your own feelings. You come in with the idea that let's just say that I'm a member of the general public, and I'm like, okay, so there's no way that black people are murdered more than white people by the police. And then, for the most part, you're out in the military, you're very patriotic, you love this country. What happens when a black soldier dies at the hands of police and they say that's a closed casket? Because he wasn't shot in his uniform. He was shot in his plain clothes. But that was still a patriot. That's still
Exactly.
a soldier. That's still the people you claim to love and fight for in this country. What happens when they're also a soldier?
Yeah.
Why does that mean more? Why does that not mean more?
And to go along with that, like, it's Memorial Day is, like I said, we have to remember the people who have passed away, and veterans who are no longer with us. This includes the black soldiers during World War I, during World War II, who went to war, fought side by side with white people, and created their own platoons, that they did everything possible to fight for the country, to come back and
Still be treated
be
less.
treated like lesser.
Exactly.
That they weren't even allowed to drink from the same water fountain. They weren't, they lost all these rights, and and yet we continue to have this. I remember, I think, I don't remember it was you or it was another friend, but they had said that their significant other who is black felt safer overseas than they did while they were in the U.S.
Oh, that was me.
That was you?
That was me. Yep. To be fair, he was born and raised in the South,
Yeah.
in the deep South.
But still, like, if you want to honor our veterans, that means all our veterans. That means doesn't matter what color they are. We gotta honor them and make it so that way when they come back, that they feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, make it
That they
like to
feel-
the point where they fought for some a reason why they were fighting. It's like they come back and it's just like
They fought for
nothing's
freedom.
changed.
They fought for freedom. And why is it when they come back here, they don't have the freedom to live?
When I confronted my family on on the fact that my boyfriend's black, and that whole argument that sprung up from there. The breaking point in the conversation, because it was a conversation until I asked a question, and then it became an argument. And the question was, why does he have, or it wasn't posed as a question. I'm sure I could get I still have the letter somewhere because I was reading from a letter. But I basically said something along the lines of like, I am sure that this man did not serve in the military, which you tout as supporters. You have the bumper stickers, you have the license plate holder, you say support our troops whenever you can, you actively support the military, as one probably should. If you live in America, that's what they love the most about America, is the military. But if you love it so much, because he risked his life, before I met him, he had already served 2 deployments. So he risked his life more than those amount of times on those deployments. And he's currently deployed now, risking his life overseas. And for what? When he gets to come home, for him to be treated as the token black friend, for him to be called, considered that he's a part of the baby mama culture. There are so many, like, they weren't even slurs. Well, they were just quotes that were used in his direction. You're like, this dude did exactly what you wanted him to do. And for many, it's not enough. And it's still not enough.
Yeah.
It's still not enough. And I was aware of that going into it. I did not realize the extent and the depth of, it's not even the prejudice, just the fear. Just the fear that I would be with the black guy. I never in my life thought that would be a fear. Right. Because I have never been mistreated by a black guy. I've been mistreated by a white dude, but people wanted me to stay with him. But that was a toxic relationship. So you grow, you move forward, you meet new people. And that's where that becomes very personal to me. Yeah. Because, and that's also the reason why, like, I feel like I can't fully protest, because one, I'm a member of media, and I'm trying to keep my biases to a minimum during the protests. But also, I feel like I can't properly protest when the person who I want most to be with me is not here, who doesn't really know what's going on because he's deployed. How is he supposed to know? I haven't spoken to him.
Wait, he's not like aware per se of like everything going on, or like?
I'm sure he's aware, because I know I told Will this earlier, but when I told him about the protests that were going on, we had a brief like 10-minute phone call a few days ago. He had asked, he's like, what's going on? And I told him the overview of the protests and the state of affairs with our nation. And he said, don't go to the protests. And I said, I'm not gonna protest. And he said, I know you're not going to protest. I don't want you to go.
Interesting.
And that's also because it's not that I have asked him outright. I've had friends ask him outright, like, how, especially my friends who came down from Canada, they'd ask him, like, how racist are the police in Alabama? He said in that instance that he didn't have, like, a terrible experience in his hometown. He's had it outside of his hometown that I know of. And to be fair, I don't even know if he's telling me the whole truth. I didn't ask him too far deep beyond that question. So I'm sure he has other reasons for me not wanting to go to the protest, but the fact that police brutality and tear gas is being used and rubber bullets are being used, that's knowing him, that's at the forefront. That's why. He's more afraid of the police pushback than he is of protesters.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think honestly that's what I feel like the main concern tends to be a lot of the times is like the cops, you know, whenever like people have like asked, some friends whenever they ask me like how things are going, you know, because you know some of them living outside of San Diego, they don't know exactly the extent of the protests going on, and there's some that are more worried because of that police pushback, and then there's like a few of them that are just like, oh, the looters, you know. But
hey guys, let me just interrupt you for a little bit there. We're going to our 2-hour mark right now. Do you guys want to take a break or you want to keep going?
I'm cool to take a break, actually.
Yeah, so let's just give our, kind of finishing off our thought, and then we can go, back and actually focus on the protests that are going on right now. Because
the later
it's
it
getting
gets,
very interesting.
the more interesting things happen.
We can still talk to our protester friend.
Oh, that's
So-
right.
Yeah, so we still have one more call.
We kind of kept her on the line a bit.
Yeah, we still got one more call. We're gonna take a little break and
Yeah.
make sure she's still available.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for talking with us. Please feel free to ask more questions. We love starting conversations.
Yeah, even like being outside of the U.S., I think that's really good of you to be able to educate yourself too on like what's going on too as well, because I feel like that perspective is unique both to us and to you of like the in and outs of looking at these kinds of
Yeah,
situations.
and if it's a question that we can't answer, it's definitely a question that we can speak on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like you said, like I love hearing the perspective of other people because it make me think outside of what we are naturally prone to thinking. Like that's my favorite thing about traveling is when people, when I get to ask them questions about what's going on there, and they get to ask me questions, and like that's the first time that I started thinking about where is our place in the world as a country.
Yeah.
Like how is it that we impact others? Because the fact that everybody in the world is talking about this right now shows the
Our
impact that we have,
influence. Yeah.
the influence. So yeah, let's take a little break. We'll be back in. You guys want to do 8:15 or 8:30?
We'll do 8:15 because we've been kind of keeping Devin on the wait for.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll be back in about 20 minutes. Yeah, so this is the Hub Podcast. Make sure to follow us on Instagram. Hit us up on Instagram or Twitter at the Hub Podcast. And if you want one of these masks, feel free to hit us up on there.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.